Hello, everybody. So I just kind of got the inspiration to do this today. Um, I was thinking about what could make some interesting chess content. And actually, I was watching Gotham Chess, um, and I was watching his sort of classical game analyses. And for me, these are kind of the most interesting. I think over the board chess, where they're, you know, spending like 4 hours on the game, they're really thinking about it, and they're talking basically through that whole experience, just so much more interesting than, frankly, online games. Um, so a bit about myself, Dashiell. So I am this player here. My current rating, so my English rating you can see is 2229. But you can see it's actually gone up to about 2234. But if you look at my FIDE rating, is a fair bit lower. So a FIDE rating is actually 1991 standard, 1986 rapid, and 2042 blitz. Um, Partly this is because I played a lot more. So in England, we have our national rating and then our FIDE ratings. And I've played quite a bit more ECF rated chess. So I'd like to think this is sort of more representative of my ability. But basically, I want to improve at chess. I'd like to get my FIDE up to a similar level like this. Um, Potentially get something like a candidate master title. So I really want to kind of work at it this year. And one of the ways that people talk about most, being able to boost your rating is analyzing your games. So I thought I'll have a go at this. I'll analyze a classical game. So this was played 75 minutes plus 15. And I drew with this Alex Trifunovic. Now, he's an interesting player because he best elo is 2265, so quite high. Although if you actually look at his games, he played a lot, up to the period 2000, so he hasn't played that recently. These games like Lloyd's Bank Open, which was a famous tournament in the 90s. Um, this is sort of going up to the year 2000 and was actually in the sort of varsity Oxbridge match. So I also played this when I went to Oxford about 16 years later. Um, so anyway, so that's sort of the context of the game. So it was this Central London League. My team OTB was playing HMC, and I'd prepared for some of these players, but not Alex, because he actually hadn't played any games for them this season. So about 5 minutes before the game started, I got a notification saying this is who I was playing, and I really didn't know much about him. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to show up and see how the game goes. So I'll switch over to the Lichess analysis and sort of talk through it. So so I'm playing white is the first thing to say. And I open with pawn to e4, and he responds with the Sicilian defense. I play knight to f3. He plays knight c6. And I opt for bishop b5, which is called the Rossolimo variation. I mean, also possible is like d4, where, there's a lot of lines here. I mean, there's a Sveshnikov, which is very popular. There's just a four knight Sicilian. Even like Levy is playing this move at the moment, e5, which is also recommended by English Grandmaster Danny King, and I believe it's called the Kalashnikov. There's e6. So the thing about an open Sicilian is it's a really deep, dark web of variations. And some of the problem with playing it as white is that because there are so many variations black can kind of opt for, they sort of have their pet variation, and then you have to kind of know like six or seven. So that is why in this instance I opted to play the Rossolimo. The other thing I would say about the Rossolimo is that Magnus in an interview actually said he thinks bishop b5 is closer to the absolute sort of truth of chess, and whereas he thinks against d6, d4 is objectively stronger. So just put that on the board. So that's some interesting context about the Rossolimo as well. He plays this move knight f6. Now this is recommended by Danny King again. And I would say it's probably one of the more direct kind of um, tries for black against the Rossalimo. Probably the main line is g6. And then there's a lot of theory there. I mean, other moves. I have had e5 in a game, which is very interesting. d6. Yeah, a lot is possible. I've even seen this, which is really crazy. Um, I've seen knight a5. You know, there's like people have tried a lot against this particular system. So I then have quite a few options in this position. As you can see here, there's sort of three main moves: knight c3, bishop c6, and e5. But I actually go for this move, knight c3. Heavily logical, just defending the pawn. And he plays g6, which is the second most common move in this position. It's worth noting that queen c7 is an interesting option for black. And I think part of the point is around this kind of move. Or maybe not in this exact position, but in some line. Yes, exactly. Now this knight g4 idea, with the idea of taking on f3 and then taking on h2. So obviously h3 is no good. Quite an interesting idea. If you're going to play g3, which I think is got some strong games. So it's worth me kind of researching that line a bit. But knowing that g3 is an option is actually quite helpful. So we've got Timo Gareev, for example, because it is 0.7, even though it looks scary. I mean, if he just goes for it with like h5, which I guess is most critical, we can take and play knight d5. So yeah, okay. But anyway, that's just sort of another thing to be aware of, that there's that attacking idea. But in the game, he played g6, Trifunovic, and then I castled. He goes bishop g7. So he's just sort of fianchettoing. I was already a bit out of book here. Like, I already feel like I was making it up a little bit. So I was a bit concerned that, you know, he might really know this position. Because as I say, I don't really know too much about him as a player. So is he booked up? Is he not booked up? Kind of hard for me to say at this stage. So I played rook e1. So I'm just basically trying to keep the tension, because obviously one key idea in the Rossalimo is often to take and double these pawns, right? So if he recaptures, I can play e5. After, say, knight to g4, rook e1, castles, h3, knight e6, knight e4. And we might get some position like this. And I think, yeah, again, quite a lot of games in this position between reasonably strong players, something like b6, d3. And now we transpose to, you know, fairly strong players like Wei Yi, knight f5. And this is the move that I kind of feel that I'm not that strong enough to understand, is actually this c3 idea. Because to me, c3 looks counterintuitive to what you're trying to do, because to me it looks like he's got the two bishops, so ideally you want to kind of keep the position locked up. Obviously this allows for, say, bishop a6, d4, where the position gets more open. I suppose White's claim is that as long as this bishop is locked out, the position's still good. So wow. So yeah, this is some really interesting theory. And f5. I mean, gosh. So anyway, that's a potential line if I play e5. So I'm trying actually to just keep the position steady and not kind of like go into these sort of theoretical things at the moment. So he now castles and I play pawn to d3. Which I think, according to the engine, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it as such, but it's probably just not that direct of a move, which is probably why the engine's now saying zeros. And he plays this move, knight d4, which is fairly direct. I'm just trying to wonder what other options he has. in the position. I suppose another interesting thing to consider is what happens if he plays pawn to d5. Because I can capture and then almost start attacking these pawns as if it were like a Nimzo, if that makes sense. So I can play knight a4. Potentially. What does the engine think of it? Okay, so knight a4 is not good immediately. But it does like e5, knight d7, and now knight a4. So that's an important, again, one lesson from this is just shutting out this this dark squared bishop. Yeah, so d5 immediately the engine doesn't actually like it. Like, okay, just normal move d6, and then sort of asking me what's my plan. Obviously setting up knight d4. And here black is kind of taking over a little bit. Could even go for triple double pawns in an opposite color. So, you know, but white hasn't really achieved what they could reasonably want out of this opening. So worth noting, just d6. I mean, it looks like I have to play this for equality, which I just don't love, because I kind of don't see what my next few moves are, if that makes sense. I mean, I understand I can play maybe knight e4 and c4 would be what was coming to my head anyway, but yeah. We get bishop c4 and we get, oh no, sorry, we get knight d4. I play bishop c4. He now plays d6. So obviously he's threatening bishop g4 is his kind of idea. So I could play h3, but the reason why I didn't opt for h3 was that after a6, this is what I calculated in the game, a4, bishop d7, b5's kind of coming, and I couldn't see what my kind of idea was to counter it. So for that reason, I just decided to play knight takes d4. He recaptured with a pawn, and I put my knight onto e2. So I'm sort of threatening this pawn, though it's always a bit dangerous to take it, given the influence of this bishop. Yeah. So he's got a few options. I mean, e5, I kind of don't like for him just because it fixes the structure and it allows me to have this break at some point. I mean, one thing to note is I've already put my rook on e1. I'd ideally prefer it on f1 to support the f4 break. But yeah, so you could go to knight d7. I think it's worth noting this is probably the most direct, just equalizing move. But what he said to me after the game, because we did analyze it, was that whilst he thought this made sense, he wanted to keep more winning chances. And after something like this, maybe the question to this knight is it actually well placed? I mean, it's a slightly strange place. I think I'd be happier with it on f3. So I think that was probably the simplest way for him to play. He decided to play with his knight d7, and I played this move f4. So my idea is to cover the e5 square, prevent knight to e5. And then I've got actually a very kind of easy Grand Prix style attack of moves like rook f1, knight g3, f5, queen g4, queen h, you know. I mean, obviously he's got moves too, but like the point is it's quite easy for me to imagine how I'm going to play on the king side. If his play becomes a bit aimless, like this attack can start to get quite dangerous potentially. So he plays rook b8, obviously with this idea of b5. I didn't think very long here before playing a4, which I think the computer is... yeah, computer thinks it's the best move. Just prophylaxis, yeah, so we're just stopping b5. And now he plays knight c5. And already I'm curious what his idea is. So I played b4 probably too quickly. I think in general, one of my problems that I'm trying to work on in classical is playing too quickly in certain positions. So here I played b4. Um, the main idea being that after knight to e6, f5 looked just crushing to me because this knight's getting chased around the whole board, and I'm really getting the attack in quite quickly now. I suppose you can play d5, so it's not entirely trivial, but yeah. So I thought that looked good. I mean, you can also play knight a6, perhaps. Attacking his pawn. I've got various options like rook b1, bishop d2, bishop a3. But in general, I thought like, okay, what's he done in the last few moves? You know, he's sort of just like moved this knight around. Then I think I went to the bathroom after playing this, and I realized in the bathroom, oh god, his idea is to sack here, right? Because this is a possibility. Because when I recapture, he can play d3, attacking this rook, attacking this knight. I don't need to play. If I play here, it could potentially be bad because after this, he would win this pawn. But luckily, I can play rook b1, and then we'd have some position like this, which the computer gives us slightly better for him. I think I've got a bit more development, but my position feels actually a bit loose, I would say, whereas his is like ultra solid. So I was like, oh god, that's a pretty smart idea. But I was surprised he actually took here, right, in the game, which you can see is a worse move. It's 0.5 for me now. So after rook takes, obviously b5 is his point, right? So forking these two pieces. Though I noticed I can win a pawn, so I can just take on f7, which I did in the game, right? I took f7, you recapture with a rook, and I took on a7. So I'm a pawn up now. So the question is, why did he go for this line giving me a pawn? You know, we know he's a 2260 FIDE player. I suppose his claim is that he's got the two bishops, and that my extra pawn is this kind of backward c pawn, right? Like it's never going anywhere because it's dominated by this pawn, supported by this bishop. Another really, I think, important positional feature is that after, say, knight g3, there's no sort of jumps for my knight. So what is the long-term future of this piece? Even what is the long-term future of this piece, right? On the other hand, his pieces aren't really that good. This bishop's kind of, as they say, biting on granite, looking at this pawn. This bishop, like, where does it actually want to go? Queen b6, I played rook a5. It's probably in retrospect a bit simpler just to bring the rook all the way back. I thought rook a5 is interesting just because it gives the rook and a queen a job of looking after this pawn in some line. So we got e5, and now finally my rook's able to return to the square that is, you know, wanted to be on for most of this game, supporting the f4 advance. Bishop e6, knight g3, rook f8. And now I noticed I have an interesting pawn sack in return. So as we know in chess, often when your opponent sacks material, one of the best ways to deal with that is to give the material back in return for the kind of compensation that you lost, right? So we have f5, take, bishop goes back. It's worth analyzing this variation. So what happens just if everything comes off, right, and he gets the pawn back? I think it really looks scary. So I've got this queen lined up against this king, this rook potentially coming to a8, and this bishop coming to h6. So I think in the game I stopped my analysis about here because, like, I just thought in some way I should kind of be winning here. I think computer bears this out like +1, right? So, okay, so there's nothing crushing after this, but it just thinks I've got a, like, Okay, so things I'm going to get, for example, this pawn. Yeah, so quite interesting. So obviously he didn't go for that. He went for this move bishop d7, which I think practically is a lot better. You'll notice the engine still says plus 1.1. And his next two moves were critical because here is where I gave away the advantage from a winning position to a drawing position. So I had about 30 minutes on my clock at this point, and he had about 12 minutes. So I think my psychology in the game, as I recall, was to just make a fairly quick move here to put the clock pressure back on him. I think that was actually the wrong approach. I think I should have invested some time. Now, I played this move bishop d2. Now, the engine actually believes that I should be more direct. I should play bishop g5 with potential ideas of f6. I think in the game I was worried about him just kicking with h6, but there's actually this really interesting point that the computer shows that I always have this threat where I'm just completely winning. Now, that is somewhat hard to see, perhaps at my level. Maybe grandmasters see that easily. So he played queen c6. And I play queen b1. So this was my mistake, queen b1. Because it gives the pawn back in slightly unfavorable terms. I think it's quite funny because once I saw this Rubinstein game, I think when I was studying chess as a kid, where he makes this like maneuver to get queen on, I think I've been quite influenced by it ever since. But actually, one option the engine says is just to play this. It's just simple chess, right? I didn't want to play this because my knight still has no squares, but in the end of the day, I am a pawn up, and this just keeps the game going. Another way to play after queen c6 is, I think, let's check with the engine quickly. Rook a7, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And actually, this move that a friend Chris Dunn actually thought of, h4, really interesting with the possibility of going h5. So queen b1, the problem with it, as played in the game, is basically that it's going to take my queen away from this g4 square that it wants to be on. So we get gf5, ef5, bishop f5, knight f5, rook f5, rook f5, rook f5, and queen a2. So queen a2 was sort of the point of my idea, as it were, because I thought, okay, this king is still exposed. I'm going to have rook a8. And from afar, it seemed to me that I should have decent chances to keep the game going. As it turned out, after d5, it's actually not that simple because this obviously shuts off my queen of this diagonal, and imagine these queens come off. So let's give a sample lines to say, like, we get something like this. You know, these endings are really scary now because of these pawns coming through. So I suddenly realized, oh god, I'm probably, like, we're equal on pawns now, and I'm probably not better. So like rook a8 check, king f7, rook a7 check, king f8. Like, how am I making progress? I mean, if it go check, he's also got the option of just coming back, right? So it's like, so players move rook a6, and he plays queen d7. And in the game, we repeat and make the draw. Now, he does have this option to play on, and we discussed this briefly after. I think there's something psychological, like when he's been on the back foot for the last few moves, so he probably didn't want to play on in this way. Yeah, kind of like psychologically happy to make the draw, but also it's just very unclear. So I play h3, or I could start with check. Now I play h3, and though he gets this check, my king is actually quite safe here because this square is covered. So although he is actually better, but on a higher depth, it's now saying draw, right? So it's just double-edged. So like e4 with the clear threat of e3, I play bishop h6, And now he gives a check over here. I play g3. He gives a check here. Wow. I go here. And if he takes, presumably I take here. And it would be a perpetual in the end. So he played this move, queen c6. I swap everything. And Engine thinks actually he's the favourable one. But he had about 5 minutes at this point. I had about 12. So I do understand practically why he decided to take the draw. Anyway, that's my game analysis of this video. Do let me know in the comments if you found this interesting, if I'm going on too much in certain sub-variations. Like, it's quite hard to know, I suppose, how much analysis is kind of interesting. But yeah, just thought I'd give this a try, and do sort of follow the channel if you enjoyed it.